Plinko is the game.
What I have for you today is a little different. Mostly on this channel, I like to endeavor in video games, whether it be looking at a video game or doing a countdown based on them. Today we're going to dive into one of my other favorite forms of media, board games. Sitting around the table, being able to play with your friends, it's something I truly love whenever I get the chance. But not only do I have a board game I would not want to put anyone through, this is arguably one of the weakest adaptations of something so beloved. To summarize, the price was wrong on this one.
By now, I'm sure most of you have at least heard of The Price is Right, but just in case, I'll give a slight synopsis. The show began in 1956 as a bidding game on merchandise. The closest to the actual price gets the prize. It was later revamped into the more well-known show in 1972, hosted by the legendary Bob Barker. The bidding was still there, but along with the prize, the contestant would then play a pricing game for an even bigger prize. There are many famous pricing games, like the Grand Game, Hole-in-One, Lucky 7, and countless others I could name. But one game stands above all as the ultimate favorite, by the name of Plinko. Contestants get one chip and try to earn 4 more by identifying the right prices on certain items. Up to 5 chips are then dropped on the board for a possible $50,000. More so if it was a special show. Just don't ask what happened on the 30th anniversary of Plinko. We don't talk about that.
While The Price is Right had board games before, including a DVD board game, it wasn't until the good year of 2020, where nothing went wrong, when The Price is Right's famous game of Plinko came onto store shelves. It seemed like a surefire win, the most famous and arguably greatest Price is Right game ever to be made, right at home whenever you want. It sounded great! But let's start to go over why it, well, isn't great.
The first thing you'll notice is the board itself once you assemble it. Honestly, it's fine enough, looking similar to the actual game, just using wood for the backdrop and supports to keep it up. The sides are plastic to keep the chips falling out, with pegs to shuffle it back and forth. The display lights up in basic white coloring, and it reacts to where the chip has landed by flashing the column once it hits the sensor.
And just as advertised on the box, it comes with its own authentic soundtrack. It plays the Price is Right theme whenever you boot up the game. It'll play the big money sound for 10 grand. It'll play the Price is Right fail theme for 0. And for everything else, so close.
The chips are, well, let's face it, it's just a metal ring with plastic coverings on each side to make them look like the authentic Plinko chips. Though you may need to be ready to catch the chips that fly off, since the midsection pops out a bit. No idea why, to be honest. Overall, it's fine enough, and can last a good while when dropping the chips, but that's where the problem starts.
But how exactly do you earn these chips, I hear you say? Well, that right there and then brings the biggest problem of the board game front and center. And it makes you question how and why it would even handle it the way it did. It brings up a lot of questions. So let's talk about those questions.
Unlike the game it's based on, Plinko has you earn all 5 chips by answering questions. These questions are all based on other pricing games, like More or Less, High-Low, or Back in the Day. Another player asks a question, and if you get it right, you earn the chip. 5 questions later, it all repeats again for the other players. At least that's what I thought, but again, we'll get to it. Once every player has asked 5 questions, then you use the Plinko board, and the biggest score of all the dropped chips wins. Sound simple? Let's get into it.
So, say for instance you had 6 players with you. That would mean you have to go through 30 questions before you even talk about the Plinko board. And you gotta love how the manual specifically says to keep the answers hidden, because you have to show them the picture on the card, but since the cards are both double-sided with the answer plastered on it, you're gonna have to awkwardly hold it, so you have to hide the answer. A little inconvenient, but not all that bad. I mean, it's not as if you could have a booklet of the answer so you could just look through that instead of just looking on the card. Sure, it would have wasted more paper, but it's arguably easier than just holding the question like this. Not to mention, you could give other answers away if you accidentally flip over the card. Well, prepare for even more questions. And I mean that in a bad way. If that, wasn't obvious.
Close to half the questions are Contestants Row, the bidding game, which makes sense. But why not keep the questions like the actual Plinko game? I suppose making questions like the pricing games could make sense, but that's like going down an actual slide in Chutes and Ladders, or eating candy every time a special card is drawn in Candyland. It just wastes time from the actual game you're supposed to be playing. Oh, wait, there are Plinko questions. There's just only some of them. Just about 10 out of the 100. And somehow, it gets convoluted, because if someone gets the question wrong, then the answering player is the next reader. This continues on, and if it's a group question, the person next to the reader becomes the new reader anyway. And according to the instructions, everyone must ask 5 questions, then the question round is over. So why not just read 5 questions and pass to the next person? This question system makes it much harder than it needs to be. And say someone gets lucky with the group questions and their own, it's very possible they could have at least 10 chances on the board while you may have only 2. Which doesn't sound very fair, does it? Yes, the money amounts can make it so everyone has a fair chance, but still, I'd rather have more chances than not, so excuse me for being a tad salty about this. It doesn't help the instructions are also very vague on this. They say that each person has to read the 5 questions, but they don't exactly say how it goes when they say you have to skip it to the next person if someone has the question wrong. But the crazy thing? You don't need the questions to play Plinko. I know, that sounds very confusing, but I'm sure you've played it before. You ever went to a carnival or event and you saw these prize drop games? Drop the chip and earn the prize? Seems familiar when you really think about it, doesn't it?
Let's face it, if you did purchase this game, it'd most likely be because you want to drop these chips right down the board. I mean, honestly, it's pretty authentic. You look back here, you look up there, there's a button on the board, see it go. That happens. But more so, it's just the questions. They drag out the game so much. Since every player has to ask 5 questions, a possible 50 questions before you even drop 1 chip on the board. And you can't imagine the other players just twiddling their thumbs waiting for their chance to either answer a question or get asked a question. I guess the group play questions kind of are the way to fix that, but that's no excuse. Hey, you know how to do these questions? You know what's more fun than this? Even that wasn't fun.
The money is tallied up based on the board's earnings, and the biggest amount wins. Unless there's a tie, in which both players drop 1 last chip. The bigger amount declared the winner. The game can last anywhere between a half an hour to a full hour. But for those who just want to drop the chips, that time can easily be cut in half, if not cut even more so based on how fast you drop the chips. And this is all for how much again? $40!
How about that? Put it simply, the physical version of Plinko is just not worth it. The rules make it way more complicated than it needs to be, a board that only works part of the time. For such a famous game, it's surprising that it was handled this, well, poorly. I would only say it might be worth it if it was on a big sale and your curiosity really piqued. Otherwise, steer clear of it. This is not worth it. Plus, when it's assembled, you can't even get it in the box, so it makes you wonder what's even the point of the box. But hopefully, our next endeavor into the board game realm will be better than this one. I'm the Gaming Genius, and next time, I hope you'll pass go with me to collect $200. Wink, wink.